Welcome to the special edition of the Global Exchange here on the Baltic Sea in St. Petersburg. We're going to have a healthy debate on the future of the emerging markets. We know over the last decade that Brazil, Russia, India, and China have together helped drive growth, especially over the last 5 years. But there's concern now that they're starting to falter. Let's see first where we've come from in the last decade of the BRICS. 10 years ago, a bold prediction was made. Brazil, Russia, India, and China would reshape the world economy. 4 countries to drive future global growth as the building blocks of a new world order. Today, few would doubt just how significant the BRIC nations have become. The world economy has doubled in the last 10 years, with the 4 BRIC nations contributing a third of that growth. Over the decade, the BRICS grew 4 times faster than the United States. The value of their stock markets more than quadrupled. In the past 5 years alone, the BRICS have accounted for half of all global growth. Back in 2001, China was the world's 6th largest economy. Now only the United States is bigger. These are the numbers that tell a story of radical economic change. While the rise of the BRIC nations and the world's economies tilt east, these are the themes that define the decade. But in the 10 years since the BRICS entered our collective consciousness, a new batch of numbers reveal a new chapter has begun. In 2012, Brazil will expand less than 3% for a second year running. Russia is unlikely to exceed 4% growth anytime soon. India's first quarter growth was the lowest in 9 years, while it holds on to its investment grade by a thread. And China's economic growth target is now the lowest since 2004. A decade after the birth of the BRICS, the Big Four stand at a crossroads. Brazil, Russia, India, and China remain among the healthiest of the world's big economies. But their meteoric rise has slowed as doubts over the management of their economies grow. How well they will withstand the damage wreaked by the euro crisis is now open to question. And for the first time in a decade, the BRIC acronym no longer stands for booming growth. Let's first and foremost introduce our panelists. We'll go from left to right here. Kirill Dmitriev is the CEO of the Russian Direct Investment Fund, which has had a very active St. Petersburg meeting here. Adi Godrej is the chairman of the Godrej Group, but also the president of the Confederation of Indian Industry. On his left is Klaus Kleinfeld, the chief executive officer and chairman of Alcoa, and they're joined by Dr. Jun Ma, who's the chief economist for Deutsche Bank in China. Gentlemen, it's nice to have you on the Global Exchange debate here in St. Petersburg. Kirill, it'd be interesting to start with you because your fund is relatively new to the marketplace. Are you looking, as you expand now and you see growth faltering a bit in the BRICS, to do more East-East cooperation, East-East partnerships to fuel growth in that sort of strategy?
Definitely, John. And by the way, I think 4% growth is not that bad in the current world environment, but we do look to build partnerships. And for example, recently we created a Russia-China fund, which is going to basically promote cooperation between Russia and China. The trade right now is 83.5 billion, but it's expected to grow to 200 billion by 2020. So we want to invest with China and build that relationship, but also invest with other economies that are developing and emerging, because we still believe that 4% growth is not that bad if you put it in the context of what's happening with some other countries.
Klaus Kleinfeld, you've had to commit sizable funds overseas in search of growth. Do you have any sense of mild panic now that we've slowed down a little bit, or do we need to all take a step back and say, this is pretty decent growth, we should just continue to forge ahead?
Well, in our industry, you invest in longer-term cycles, basically, and I think you really have to track back to understand and probably get a little bit of a calibration on what's going on today. What I call the mega trends are still very much there, and they are very substantially different from what we've seen in the past. I would say population growth. I mean, for me, the most fundamental thing that has happened last year was that the 7th billion inhabitant of this planet has been born, right? And if you look at the projections, which are usually pretty stable, people are clear that 1 billion more people will live on this planet most likely by 2025, and then we have another 1 billion very soon after that. That's a very new dynamic. Another new dynamic is many people are living in cities today, and cities require very different infrastructures. The projections are by 2025, more than 57% of the world's population is going to live in cities. You see the very dramatic rise of the middle class, and that's true for the emerging countries. I mean, I'm sure, Andy, you see that in your country, and it's along the line of what humans want. I mean, once you have your basic needs covered, basically food on the table, water, clean water, hopefully electricity, then you're thinking of getting a refrigerator. Once you have a refrigerator, you probably want an air conditioner. Once you have an air conditioner, you want to upgrade from a bicycle to a motorcycle. You see that. You see that happening. So I'm much more optimistic that we'll see, in general terms, over a longer period of time, we'll see consumption increase. There's one caveat to it. We always have the potential from the financial industry side to screw it up. Right? I mean, that's possible still. I believe that the actions that are taken are going in the right direction. My personal wish is if it would go a little faster, but that's one of the issues where we see the political process has gotten more and more decoupled in the speed from the global, the global industrial speed, which is rapid, absolutely rapid.
In fact, we have the two pillars here of the BRIC economies, both in India represented and in China. Let's start with China and the response to the downturn we've seen, in particular with the Eurozone right now. Dr. Jun, do you think, in fact, that China is responding with all the tools necessary to protect at least 7% growth in 2012, but still manage this migration to the major cities and to grow the middle class, which is the main objective here for stability?
I think in the short term, the problems are being addressed by some cyclical tools. For example, interest rates are being cut, reserve requirements are being lowered, and the government is now advising the banks to lend a little bit more aggressive to medium long-term projects. I think these actions will work in the coming few months. And the second quarter, we're probably going to see the trough of the economic growth at around 7.5%. And second half, I think it will be a picking up. Maybe towards the end of this year, we'll be seeing some recovery towards 8.2, 8.3%. So I'm not so worried because it's a short-term problem. Now back to your issue of sort of a more structural change or medium-term shift towards consumption-led economy. That's a much longer-term agenda, not only driven by policies, but much, much more driven by demographic change.
Should we be very concerned in this year of transition in China and some of the things we saw, for example, in Chongqing? You think that the Communist Party apparatus moves very smoothly and it's going to be a nice natural transition to the next leader? Obviously a challenge always when we think about it in the context of Russia as well. If I'm an international investor, do I need to worry at all about this transition year in China?
I've been talking to a lot of investors. I think they worry too much. For example, in Europe, I was doing a roadshow recently. They spend like 20-30% of time talking about Chongqing. It's not the case in China. I think the real impact on economic policies and so on is minimal, especially in the short term on the cyclical policy issues. Longer term on reform, I think it's actually positive. You see the reforms actually speeding up recently after March. In terms of opening up the capital account, increasing the flexibility of the interest rates, and also allowing foreign investors to come in through the QFII scheme to the domestic capital markets.
Adi, you know how we are in the media. We always look for nice, easy labels, if you will. And I noticed that the Boligarchs, as they're known here in Mumbai, have been more vociferous with New Delhi. They haven't been hesitating, particularly the CII, the big confederation. Are you frustrated by the lack of movement? It is the world's largest democracy, but the complaint from the business community is it can't respond in a very measured way like a China or a Russia right now. Is that a frustration you have?
We are certainly concerned that the reform process has slowed down. So the CII theme for this year is to revive growth through reform and governance. We have many tools in India, so we could revive growth quite easily and quite rapidly. For example, our indirect tax reform, which is pending, called the goods and services tax, like a European VAT, it could add 1.5 to 2 percentage points to India's GDP growth, other things being equal. And we hope that it can become legislation by April 2013. There are many other reforms, such as opening up to more foreign direct investment, balancing our budgets better, reduce the fiscal deficit. Subsidies in certain cases like fuel and food have risen quite dramatically. So we expect that this reform process will move forward after our presidential election in July. And hopefully we could have say, the year 13-14, we could come back to a 9% growth rate. So the opportunities are big. We have the ammunition. We just haven't used it sufficiently.
Adi Godrej on the unrealized potential of India. Well, that's a look at the first 10 years of the BRICS. When we come back, the next 10 years, as we explore the emerging markets on the global exchange in the special edition from St. Petersburg.